everyone, and welcome to today's Best Practices session. We are really delighted to welcome April Dunford to speak today. I've been chasing her for a couple years, but she is, after hearing her speak, and reading her blog, I just thought she was excellent and could provide a lot of value to our community. But she's a very busy person, so it took us a while to get her. Just a note about next month's session. We've got a really great startup from Waterloo coming in called Sweet Tooth, and they're going to be talking about excellence in customer service, the forgotten marketing strategy. And we've also heard them present as well at Communitech, and they were awesome. So we're really looking forward to that session. So today's session is how to plan and execute great startup marketing programs. Has anybody follow April's blog? Yeah. So you know it's a great blog. She has held executive marketing positions at a number of startups, helping them grow from early stage to acquisition. Her startup experience includes Janus Systems, acquired by Siebel Systems, Datamir, acquired by IBM, and Watcom, acquired by Sybase. She's also held senior marketing positions at Global 500 companies. At IBM, she launched their information integration portfolio, and at Huawei Technologies, which is a huge Chinese company, if you're familiar with it, she helped launch their enterprise portfolio of products. She works with startups as a consultant focusing on marketing planning and operations, and also acts as an advisor, board member, mentor, and investor. And as I mentioned, she writes a really popular startup marketing blog, rocketwatcher.com, which I highly recommend. So I'd like to welcome April. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. Wow, thanks everybody for coming, and thanks for the MaRS folks for inviting me. It's cool to be here, and thanks everybody for taking your lunch hour to come and listen to me. The parts of this talk I gave at the International Startup Festival in Montreal a couple of months ago, and then since then I've done it a few times with startup incubators, and it's evolving a little bit, so we'll see how it goes today. I got a great introduction already, so you guys know who I am. Basically, I've been a VP of marketing at a startup, I think 6 times now. 5 of those have been acquired. One was a big acquisition for over $1 billion, but the other ones weren't too bad either. And then because the startups I'm working at keep getting acquired, I end up doing my tour of duty at the big companies too. So I've launched some things at big companies, which is really the best marketing job you could have at a big company, is launching something new. Now I'm kind of, I'm a consultant. I'm more like a marketing gun for hire. I typically work with expansion stage companies, but with early stage companies, I'm an advisor and on the advisory board for a handful of early stage companies. And I do a little bit of investing and talks like this. And then I have a lot of beer, coffee meetings with startups as well, just kind of dispensing my advice. So because I talk to a lot of startups, it's interesting. I get this question a lot, which for an experienced marketer is kind of a terrifying question. So people will come and say, "Okay, I have this startup. I do this thing. How should I market my startup?" And that is the question. I mean, that is the thing that everybody's struggling with. But asking that question is, it's a little bit like asking, "How do I buy shoes that I love?" So if you come and you ask me, like, "I'm looking for some shoes. I want to buy some shoes that I love," I'll say, "Great, I know how I can fix that problem. I know exactly what you should do. You should go to Holtz. There's this guy, his name's Rocco. He's awesome, he's cute, he's charming, he knows a lot about shoes. Go in there and buy some shoes." And then you'll say, "Yeah, that's not really what I was looking for. Like, first of all, I don't live in Toronto, so we don't have a Holtz." "Oh, that's a problem." And they say, "Yeah, and I don't really want to spend more than $100 on shoes." "Oh, that's a problem too. And the reason I'm buying shoes in the first place, because I'm going on a walking tour of Spain, so heels, yeah, not going to work." And I'm like, "Yeah, no, Holtz is not the thing. And oh yeah, Rocco, I actually don't want to talk to a salesperson. I'd prefer to buy shoes online." You're like, "You know what? My advice was really lousy." The reason it was lousy is because the advice I'm dispensing is based on a set of assumptions. I'm assuming you're just like me, right? So, I made an assumption about how much you want to spend on shoes, how much where you like to go shopping, how you like to go shopping, what styles of shoes you normally wear, what kind of shoes you need, and why you're buying the shoes right now. That's a set of assumptions. Startup marketing advice is very similar, right? It's very similar. So, if I give you any specific advice about how to market your startup, it's going to be based on a bunch of assumptions that I make, right? Who are your customers? What motivates them to purchase things? What do they love about your offering? How do they make purchase decisions? Marketing's even worse, right? It's even worse than just general advice about things like shoes. in that when you say marketing, like marketing can mean anything. It's this gigantic discipline, gigantic, right? So there's branding, there's lead gen, there's advertising, there's social media, there's PR, there's content, there's messaging, there's sales support. I mean, there's a million different flavors of marketing, right? So, smart people, when they say, what do you do? I say, I do marketing. Smart, people that do marketing will say, yeah, but what kind of marketing, right? But if you don't know anything about marketing, you wouldn't even know enough to ask me that question, right? And so this is a problem, right? You know that expression, like if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? If you ask a PR person, a person who's a PR expert, how should you market your startup? They'll say PR. If you ask the content marketing person, how should I market my startup? They'll say content. You ask the person that's really great at email marketing, they'll say email, of course, right? Social media experts will say it's all social media, don't worry about anything else. This is a problem, right? Now the good news is that when you start thinking about specific marketing tactics, unlike when I started, and there weren't great resources either in books or on the web or anything, now if you have a very specific question about a specific marketing tactic, like if you come to me and you say, I know nothing about SEO, but I know SEO is important and I really need to do search engine optimization, what should I do? I say, don't ask me, ask Rand Fishkin. He writes an awesome blog about SEO and he can teach you everything you need to know about SEO. Right? And if you say, come to me and say, I need to understand content marketing. I know this guy, Joel Paluzzi, invented the term. He has this thing called the Content Marketing Institute. There's tons of great stuff there, right? The problem is, there's a set of questions that Google can't answer, right? And what Google can't answer is what tactics should you be focusing on right now? Because you're a startup, you can't do everything. You can't do that gigantic list of things, right? You don't have the budget to do it. More importantly, you don't have the manpower, right? You just don't have the cycles and the people to be focusing on 800 things. You have to prioritize and figure out what are the things that are the most important. And then how should you tailor these things for your business, right? Because your business doesn't look anything else. It doesn't look anything like anybody else's business. And so this is a slide I use to describe how, so I'm an engineer by training, and I got hired in a startup mainly to be a technical evangelist. So the thing they were selling was really technical, and they thought, well, it would be good to have an engineer who's a good spokesperson to go out and talk techie with the techies about this techie thing. And then what happened was my boss left, and I kind of inherited this group. And I knew nothing about marketing, absolutely nothing. And so I went out, I was quite paranoid about this because I'm an engineer and I thought my engineering training was great. So I thought, God, I know nothing about marketing, I better get boned up on this. So I bought 1 million marketing books, like literally you should see my library, it's ridiculous. I'm still a bit of a marketing book junkie, like I've read them all. I went and took courses, and not just locally, like I did courses here, but then people were telling me, oh, Northwestern, that's where you need to go. So I did some course at Northwestern, and for a while I lived in New York, I was in Columbia sitting in on classes. And the thing that was terrible is none of that advice or information seemed to relate to the thing I was doing at my startup. Right? It didn't actually help me answer those questions, right? Which of these things should I focus on, and how do I apply it to my business? So I started doing what a lot of startup marketing people do at the beginning, right? Which is you start with something, I call this the marketing fashion assessment. So you say, well, what's everyone else doing? And so you look at your competitors, you look at other people in the field, and you say, oh, they're blogging, that seems to work for them, I'm gonna try that. Right? Or, oh, they're doing email and that seems to be working for them. That's good. They're doing a lot of PR and I see them in the Globe all the time. Must be good. I'm going to do some of that. And so then the next step is I select the tactics, right? Okay, I'm going to pick 2 or 3 of these things. I'm going to execute on those tactics. And I'm not a dummy, right? And I'm kind of numbers oriented. I'm an engineer, so I'm going to measure that stuff. And I'm going to see, did it work, right? And then if it didn't work, what I would do is, well, the stuff that didn't work, I would chuck it out. And the stuff that did work, if I had a little extra money, I'd double down on that stuff. And then I'd go back to the marketing fashion assessment and say, all right, well, what are the next 3 things I could try? And that's okay, right? But it's not great, right? It's meh. That's what we call it, the cycle of marketing, meh. It's okay, right? But there were always a set of problems. And you could feel it, right, as the person in charge of marketing. Like every time you selected a new tactic, you sat around the table with the rest of the executive team and you had a fight, basically. And so you would fight over, yeah, well, do our customers really want that? Or, yeah, are those the right customers? Like we have this fight over, well, we're targeting financial services companies. Maybe we should be targeting insurance companies. And it was kind of my opinion versus everybody else's opinion, or anybody's opinion versus anybody's opinion. That was the first thing, you know, this sort of assumption on, you know, who are we targeting? What do they want to hear about? What's important? We get into messaging, that was terrible, right? Like I'd say, well, I think these are the 3 most important messages. Guy across the street said, no, I think these are the 3 most important messages. And then we'd have a big fight about that. The other thing was that all tactics were good until tested, essentially. Like we could weed out some obvious bad stuff, but we would always get these things like, it never fails, the head of sales would come in and say something like, Raptors box seats, that's what we need. That will get us tons of business. Or golf tournament, that's when I actually had this happen where the guy came in and said, golf tournament, we need it, April, it's gonna be awesome. It's only gonna cost $100,000. I'm like, that's my whole budget. If I run the golf tournament, we won't do anything else, right? So is the golf tournament really gonna be better than everything else? Now, if I was where I am now, I would know how to have that fight. And so I'm gonna talk about, you know, how you get out of that. But at the time I didn't, right? All tactics were good until I tested them, right? So you can say, well, how do you know it doesn't work? You don't know it doesn't work, let's try one. Well, 100 grand, I can't try one for 100 grand, that's my whole budget, right? So you have this problem, everything's good until I test it. And then the last one is, there was no relationship or consistency between the tactics, right? Some of the tactics we were running were more about awareness, right? Getting people to know who we were. Some of them were more about closing business. Some of them were more about, you know, doing things in the regions. But it was a bit, again, because we randomly selected them, they were a bit randomly spread across that stuff. And you could feel it, right? Like, so the marketing was okay, but there was always this set of problems. And I started thinking, you know, I'm a systems design engineer, right? So I'm like, there must be a way to model this like a system, right? Like, is there a way I can look at this like a system and fix all this stuff? And in my opinion, you can. And so really what I started to get to was, I wasn't dealing with the inputs to the system properly, right? And the inputs to great marketing are kind of, it's all around customers, and we always say that a lot, and some people pay a lot of lip service to this, but we all know, like, it's all about customers. We're trying to separate customers from their money. That's our goal in life, right? And so the more I started thinking about it, the more I started thinking there were 3 aspects of customer knowledge that you needed to get your arms around in order to do good marketing and do a good job of picking the tactics in the first place and do a good job of assessing what you should do and what you shouldn't do. So it's really who your customers are, how they view solutions like yours, and how they buy stuff. And so I'm going to jump into each of those. The who your customers are is often, every startup I talk to will tell me, we know who our customers are. But the question is, do you know it with enough detail to actually market to them well? And so, you know, the first one is more of a B2B thing, thinking about company characteristics, but then you have decision maker characteristics. So if you're B2C, you go straight to the decision maker. But I'll give you an example. So I just did a project with a startup here. They'd just gotten a large investment from a VC, and they were looking at investing more in marketing. And so we were kind of looking at their marketing plan and what they wanted to do. And so our conversation around customers was great, right? So the initial conversation I have with the CEO is, so who's your customer? He says, Fortune 1000 companies. That's good, Fortune 1000 companies. That's not even a big list, right? That's only 1,000 companies. But the thing they do is, it's for companies that have big internal development shops. And I'm like, do all Fortune 1000 companies look the same that way? Do they all have big internal development shops? Of course not, right? And then it turned out there's a particular thing that they do. It's no good for tech companies. So if your business is technology, it's not that. Fortune 1000 companies minus tech. Okay. And then you say Fortune 1000 companies with big internal development shops. Well, some of those companies are like, you know, oil exploration or financial services or something. They have very few employees, period, let alone 0 internal development shops. So let's ignore all them. But what if you were a Fortune 2000 company and you had a big internal development shop? Would you be a target? Absolutely. Okay, so it really has nothing to do with the size of the company. It has to do with the size of your internal development shop. Okay, that's good. And then we started saying, okay, well, who are the buyers there? Well, the buyer is, there's a particular role inside that company that uses that kind of software and does this thing, has this pain that they're solving. And sometimes they have purchase authority, sometimes it's another group. But diving into that was interesting, right? When we started looking at that, you'd say, well, they actually have an association. They have conferences they go to, these people. So I can go get in front of all these people. I know what they look like. I know their demographics. They're all sort of the same. I know their skill sets. I know what they're trying to do. They have common pains, right? There's a list of things that drive these people crazy, right? But actually working through that is instructional, because when I work through that, if I said, how do you market to Fortune 1000 companies? I say, well, take out an ad in the Wall Street Journal, right? But if you say, how do you market to the person inside a company that manages requirements for an internal development shop? I'd say, well, there's these 5 conferences they go to, and they have an industry association, and there's 3 publications and 4 blogs they read. It's different, right? And I bet you that's going to work a lot better than taking out the ad in the Wall Street Journal, right? The 2 things on the bottom there are really important, right? Where they hang out. So when you get a really specific grasp of who are the people that you want to market to, you want to think about where do they cluster, right? And they generally do. So, you know, it's important to think about that. Do they hang out on Facebook? Are there particular places they hang out on Facebook? If not, maybe you care less about that. Do they use Twitter or do they not use Twitter? Are there blogs that they read? Are there associations? Are there conferences they go to? Are there physical places they hang out? Like yesterday I was in Montreal, and these guys are marketing a delivery service for food, and it's, you know, basically the people they're targeting hang out in the food court. They can actually go there and mix with these folks in the food court. Then the second thing is, where do they find out about stuff? And that's not always the same places where they hang out, right? So how they find out about, and not just any stuff, like things like yours, although any stuff might be useful too, but you know, do they use a search engine when they're looking for this stuff? For some things, people do, right? For some things they don't, right? Like, I just bought a car recently, and I was thinking about cars. I've always driven really awful, dumpy, old cars, because I don't actually use a car that much. I take public transit, but I don't know why. I just woke up one morning and said, I want a car, and this time my car's gonna be nice, right? So I said, okay, I'm gonna buy a nice car. And then I assembled my short list of nice car. And I didn't Google nice car. I said, I'm going to the BMW dealership, right? Because in my mind, nice car is that. Maybe I'll go see the Audi guy. I'm not going to the Chrysler, right? I'm definitely not going to the Saab, because I've been driving a dumpy old Saab for 5 years, so I know I'm not going there. So how they find out about stuff is important, right? Is it word of mouth? Is it media outlets? Is it blogs? Is it celebrities or particular people that they listen to, they give advice about this particular thing? I know a handful of startups that have Tim Ferriss as an advisor, right? Because what they're doing is enabling very small businesses, and Tim Ferriss is kind of a hero.
Is he the 4-hour workweek guy?
Yeah, he's the 4-hour workweek guy. So he's kind of a hero for people that sort of want to do their own thing. There's, I always pronounce his name wrong, Chris Gallipo, who's the $100 startup guy. It's the same thing. He's on a speaking tour right now. People love this guy because he's giving them a blueprint for how to do work that you love and do it in a sustainable way. That's an example of, if I was marketing to micro businesses, I might want to figure out, how to do something with these people. So where they find out about stuff is important. So that's the first one, that's customer. The second one is offering, and the hard part of this one is to sort of step outside of your company, right? Which is hard to do when you're a startup, because you're so close to it. You're building this thing. It's your baby. You're really emotionally invested in it. You know everything about it. You know everything it does. You have your own opinion about why it's great and not great, and your opinion kind of doesn't matter. So what does matter is what your customer thinks about it. So you have to kind of step out of that, step into the frame of mind of your customer and say, how would a customer describe what you do, right? That's sort of the first thing. What do you do? And what market are you in? And that's important because it matters for your competitive alternatives. So I can give you an example of this one too. I joined a startup, and we were in the middle of trying to raise some money when I joined, and trying to get our first set of customers on board. And it was really, really clever, interesting, amazing technology. But essentially what they did was a database, a special kind of database, a column-oriented database, but it was a database. I mean, there's just no way around it. That sucker was a database. And so when we were pitching to customers and investors, we would say, we have a database, an awesome database, an amazing database. Let me tell you all the ways it's amazing. And we weren't getting very far with that, because the world doesn't need another database. There's great databases out there. And in fact, if you went to a big customer, they'd say, we're an Oracle shop. We only do Oracle. We've kind of standardized on that. We don't need another database in here, even if it does something good. Oracle's good enough. We did the same problem with investors. We'd go in and say, we have a database, and they'd say, the database market is growing at 3% a year. You will never make any money in this market. Please go away. And we're like, yeah, but it's this, and it has this, and nobody cared. And so while we were out talking to customers, we had this kind of moment of epiphany with a particular customer where we were describing what we did. And we said, well, it's a column-oriented data store. So what it's really amazing at is if you have a large amount of data and you're doing like what we call a needle in a haystack query. So I'm trying to find this little specific thing, this large amount of data. And the customer, we did a demo, we showed them results, we explained how the technology worked and why it was important and all this stuff. And at the end, the customer said, oh, you're not a database. And we're like, we're not? What are we? Sure, a data warehouse. Oh, that's different from a database? Yes. Yeah, and he says, oh, data warehouse. Yeah, we have all kinds of a need for a data warehouse. Oh, we're a data warehouse. In fact, not only that, we're a data warehouse. When do you have these large data sets? Well, one instance of that is you have machine-generated data, right? So if you machine-generated data, this is really big. And he says, you guys are a data warehouse for machine-generated data. We're like, oh, that actually sounds great. If you were to say it now, you'd say we're a big data warehouse or a big data database. Back then, we didn't have that term yet, but that would have been awesome. So then we went back and said, oh, well, if we pitch that to customers, does that get us over this? We're just another database. And it did, right? You went into customers, you got over that whole, your Oracle, your whatever, because Oracle had crappy data warehouse stuff. IBM had crappy data warehouse stuff. Microsoft didn't really have anything. They certainly didn't have anything for machine-oriented data. Right? And same deal when we went back to the VCs. We went back to the VCs and said, it's a business intelligence tool. It's a data warehouse for machine-generated data. Why is that growing? That's growing a ton. Everybody's measuring way more stuff than they ever have before. People are going to need this. All of a sudden, we're in this whole other space. And oh, by the way, that space is growing at 80% year over year. Raised $8 million.
Pivot.
Right. Well, it's not a pivot, right? Same product, same thing. It's just a different way of talking about it, right? We got more inside the head of the customer to be able to express the value of what this thing did, not the technology, right? It was the value of it. The value of it is, you got a large amount of data and you need to find this thing, right? But it has to do with this, what market are we in? We're not in the database market. We're not competing with Oracle for general database software, right? Competitive alternatives is a good one. So a lot of times people think competitors, so when you're trying to do your marketing, you're trying to position against a competitor. But a lot of times your biggest competitor is not another company or another offering, or at least not another offering in your space, right? You're competing against, for startups, a lot of times you're competing against do nothing. I don't even know I have this problem and my life is fine, so I don't need to do anything. I don't have the problem. Then that's a problem. Or you're competing against good enough tools like Excel and Word that obviously weren't designed to do your specific thing, but they're good enough and they're free and I know how to use them. The other one you get a lot is you're competing with cheap labor, right? Like you can get it done with a handful of interns and pay them peanuts and get that done too. A lot of times startups get really, because they're in the space and they're looking at all the other startups in the space, they'll position themselves against companies that their customers have never heard of, right? And they'll say, I had this the other day actually, I was having coffee with a startup and they said, we're like the blah blah for accounting. And I'd never heard of this other company. And I was like, don't ever say that to a customer. They've never heard of this, right? So you can't position yourself against something that nobody knows, right? So competitive alternatives are important. And then the last two, key differentiated points of value are really important too, right? So if you're in a space, you look at your competitive alternatives, the only thing that really matters to the customer are the things where you're different. There might be some things you have to have because they're table stakes and it might actually take you a lot of development resources to get that baseline, but there is no marketing value in it, unfortunately, right? Other than saying, yeah, we do that. Don't worry, we've got that, right? And that's depressing, right? It's depressing for a startup, it's depressing for your development team, but it is the reality, right? So I worked at a customer relationship management company, Jana. We did customer relationship management software. And, there were a lot of things in that business that were just table stakes, right? Being able to track your customers, being able to track interactions with your customers, who cares? Everybody can do that, right? You just don't talk about any of that stuff. Whereas we had a key point of competitive differentiation was the ability to model many-to-many relationships, and that was really hot for our target market, which were investment bankers, and our competitors couldn't do it. So our pitch got to the point where that's all we talked about. We basically didn't talk about everything else. And, development man hours, the other stuff took us a large amount of time to get to, and this one thing was maybe nothing, but it was really the only thing that a customer cared about, because the customer was like, well, I'm either going to buy you or I'm going to buy Siebel, so tell me how you're better than Siebel. And say, okay, we've got this thing, right? And luckily, the thing was super compelling, and there was no way that our competitor could do it. The last one is proof. So the other thing that people get into is they'll say, we're the fastest solution for this, or we're the world's most advanced solution for this, or we're the easy to use, right? Like we have the best UI of anything on the market. And that stuff is really hard to quantify. People are over-marketed to you right now. They don't believe you when you say stuff, right, as a vendor, right? We don't believe you because we're used to being told things that are exaggerated or lies or whatever. And so you saying it isn't enough. You have to be able to back it up, right? And so sometimes that means you have a third party evaluate it and say it. Sometimes that means you have data to support the claim that you're making, and that's really important. Sometimes it's as good as having a customer say it. If you say it, it's kind of baloney and suspect. If a customer says it, then it's the truth, right? If a customer says it in public, customer says it in a press release, on a blog, in a newspaper article, it's gospel, right? If you say it, it doesn't really mean that much. So making claims, you need customer references, third-party reviews, statistics, metrics, expert endorsements work, right? Like if you're doing a thing for small businesses, and Tim Ferriss says, this thing is awesome, you're awesome, right? If you stand up and say this thing is awesome, it's like maybe you are, maybe you aren't. So that's the second piece, which is offering. The last bit, and this is really tricky, and so anybody making a purchase goes through a set of steps. They're not always these steps exactly. This is kind of the generalized version. And I posted this on my blog, and I had a neat discussion with a guy that was like, well, it doesn't actually work like that. Sometimes people will go back and forth. I'm like, yeah, totally. So sometimes this isn't a linear process. Sometimes you get to a stage and then you go back and then you go. But nonetheless, there are steps. And for every step in this process, there are things that will move you along that process faster, and things that will slow you down or cause you to drop right out. So for a lot of startups, their potential customers are stuck at the far left of this, which is, I don't even think I have a need for this thing because everything I'm doing is just fine. I don't even know I've got a problem, right? So as a marketer, the thing that will speed that up is educating people about the problem, right? And the cost of not solving that problem, right? So this is a problem because you're doing it this way and you're wasting this much money. These bad things are happening. You don't even know it, right? The thing that can stop you from going to the next stage is, what I've got is fine, right? Like your problem is, so I'm wasting 10%, but God, I've got to solve the problem. That sounds like a lot of work. The next one is, I realize I've got the need, but I'm not going to do anything about it, right? So you educated me. I've got a problem, whatever. It's like iPhone people, right? I use an Android device. iPhone people say, but you don't have FaceTime. And I'm like, you're right, I don't. I don't. I can do it on Skype though, if I'm connected. And they're like, but you can't do it if you're in the subway. And I'm like, I don't do that so much. So, so I know there's a need, there's a thing, right? But I'm not motivated enough to go out and start evaluating solutions for video conferencing in the subway, right? So knowing the value of solving the problem will get me there, right? Like if somebody says, aha, but there was that time where you did whatever and your kid was dying and something and you didn't have the FaceTime. And I'd say, okay, I got to get one of those because there's lives at stake, but so it's like, the value's not all that compelling. The risk, there might be a risk that I say, the value sounds good, but I have to give up all my personal information. This is the Mint.com example. You guys have used Mint.com. It's great. It's like you can manage all your financials in it, but you got to give them all your all your banking information, right? And so, the first time I saw it, I was like, no way am I signing up for that, right? I'm gonna have all my banking information in one spot run by a bunch of jokers in Phoenix or wherever they were. I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. I don't trust you guys, right? Now, if you look at them, they have all this great stuff to sort of convince you that that's not a risk, right? And it's all about getting rid of that friction point and accelerating you to the next stage. Then there's evaluation, right? So the next step is, okay, you got me. I get it. I need to solve this problem. Now I need to go out and look at alternatives. And so that one is, people look at it and say, well, so people have to know about you. They have to get you on a short list. And then they got to decide, is this thing for me, right? So you might say, oh, you're the greatest phone ever, but I'm not an iPhone person. I'm a PC, I'm not a Mac or something. I don't know, but you might decide, well, it's not for me. Like I have this with cameras, right? Like I go and look at all this camera stuff, and some of it just looks like it's for like super camera people. I just think, oh, this isn't for me. Even if the price point and it's easy to use and everything else, sometimes I look at it and say, well, this isn't really for me. People have this about brands, where they get really emotionally attached to a brand and they say, I'm a BMW person, and I'm just going to drive BMWs. I like to think of myself as that, but I know it's not true. Then you get to the eval stage, and then you get to buying, right? So then there's okay, I evaluated, I'm going to buy, and even then you might drop out, right? You might get all the way to that stage and drop out because it was too much of a pain in the neck to buy it, right? You got it in your shopping cart, you were there, you put in your credit card information, it wouldn't take it, right? Or something happened and it was annoying and you dropped out, or the phone rang, you got distracted and you never came back. Or I went to the car dealership, I drove the car and the guy was a jerk, right? And I said, you know what? I love BMW, love your car, love everything. I hate that sales guy, I'm not gonna buy that car. Because I just don't wanna give those people my money, right? Because you're mad. It could be that you like it, but it's a little bit expensive and I'm waiting for it to go on sale, right? The iPhone people, I like it, but I went to the store and they don't have any, right? So I'm gonna wait till they have some. But by the time they have some, maybe the new one will be coming out. Maybe I should wait till the new one comes out, and then you wait and you wait some more and you wait some more. So you got past eval, but you never got to buy. Then the next one is enjoy, the next two are enjoy and renew. So it used to be when we thought about this stuff, we were selling, I've always been in the software business. When you're selling premise-based software, you sort of sold the stuff, and then you were like, sayonara, we'll charge you a little bit for maintenance, but otherwise we didn't really care too much about what happened to you after that. Unless you're a really big account, we wanted to sell you some more stuff later. Now, when people have SaaS-based software, this is super critically important to the business, right? Because your initial sale generally doesn't make your business case. Generally, your business case is based on you renewing and renewing and renewing for years, right? 3 years for most of them, right? So you bought my stuff. Now I need to make sure you actually use it so that you understand the value of it, so that you enjoy it, so that you'll keep buying it, right? And so some people, and I've had this happen where I bought stuff and then I go to use it and I'm like, oh, this thing is a pain, right? I can't get my data into it. I can't get my data out of it. It requires me to change a habit, and that's hard. So I tried to use it for a week, and then I got lazy, and I went back to the thing I was doing before. And then they call me up to renew me, and I'm like, I loved it. It was great, but I didn't actually use it all that much. I think I'm just going to go back to where I was. Or you get the customer service problem, right, where I bought it, it was great, I'm using it all the time, but every time I call your customer service, I'm sitting on hold. I mean, this way I'm not a Rogers customer anymore, right? Like, I bought from you, I've been a Rogers customer for like 10 years, but I get abuse from customer service, right? I have a phone that didn't work. I kept sending it back. They kept sending me a new one, and then they charged me. They charged me the same phone like 3 times. And eventually I just gave up. So, not that Bell or anybody else is any better, honestly, but at some point you get mad and you're like, that's it, I'm not gonna do it. So it's, you might not use it, you get bad service, or you have a bad user experience. You thought it was going to be better than it was, and the stuff was kind of crappy, or it was buggy, or it didn't work. And then the last one is renewal, right? Like, so you might use it and then not renew for whatever reason, right? Like, a lot of people don't renew because nobody ever asks them to renew, right? So they buy, and nobody ever comes and says, could you please renew? And then they just fall off the crack. They fall through the cracks that way. Or there's a newer, cooler thing by the time they go to renew, and they're like, your thing was great a year ago, but now there's a better thing. And so I'm not going to renew with you because I'm really dying to get the iPhone 5, and I didn't get the iPhone 5 last time because I couldn't get one at the store or whatever. So those are sort of the steps. So for each one of those, you need to think about. Now, for particular markets, the steps you go through will be different. Your marketing tactics will be very different at every step of those, right? So if what you've got is a market that's really educated, like let's say you're selling smartphones, right? 5 years ago, people didn't really know they needed a smartphone. Some people did, but a lot of people didn't. A lot of people were like, what's wrong with my feature phone? I can text message on it if I have to. I don't do that much. I don't need to get email. I'm certainly not going to surf the web on this thing. And you know, my phone is fine. Now, if I was selling smartphones now, I don't have that many people at the I don't even know I have a problem stage. Everybody's all educated, right? The market's fairly mature. You can jump right to the evaluation stage. If you're Samsung, right, you're not educating people on why they need a smartphone. You're educating people on why you need a Samsung, not an iPhone, right? So you're sort of assuming that the bulk of the market's already there. So it would be pointless to spend a lot of marketing effort on the far left, right? Whereas if you're doing a new thing in a new market, nobody knows anything about it, you might spend all your marketing effort talking to people about the problem and not a lot on the eval thing, because once you get to eval, you're the only game in town, right? So how you pick your tactics is really going to depend on this. Does that make sense? Am I confusing everybody? So then you get to the tactics, right? So instead of doing this kind of marketing fashion assessment, should I do a golf tournament versus email campaign, you've got all this information, right? You've done this sort of deep analysis and said, my customers look like this. They hang out here. Here's how they buy. Here's what they think about my solution. Here are the competitive alternatives to my solution. This is what the process looks like, and here's my sticky points, right? So now I can build a marketing plan around that, right? And that probably looks nothing like the marketing plan you would have built if you said, I need to do some social media, or I need to get me some email, or I need to do a blog, right? Now you've got, you know, maybe you do want to do a blog, right? But the reason you want a blog, you have this laundry list of reasons, right, that you want to do it. So I'm going to do a little walk through how you might do that assessment, because I did this talk yesterday and we had a shorter amount of time, and we didn't get into this, and then all the questions afterwards were around this stuff. So let's say your folks, you want to spend some marketing attention at this. People don't know they have the need, or they have the need and they're not motivated to actually get to the eval phase. If you start looking at it, this looks very different from further down, right? So the things you're doing are problem focused, right? So you're doing articles and blog posts, infographics, videos, curated content, newsletters, SEO. All this stuff is focused on the problem, not your solution, but the problem, right? So if I was selling customer relationship management software and it was 1 million years ago and my market didn't know that they needed to track customers, I'd be talking about, why do you need to track customers? What is the value in tracking customers, right? What do you get if you track customers? How do things work better in your sales process if you track customers? Mint.com did a great job with this, in that 6 months before they launched their product, they launched a blog where all they did was talk about managing money, right? The value of getting a better handle on your finances, why it makes sense to manage your money better, why it makes sense to bring all that information together in one place. They didn't even have a solution yet, right? But they built this great following on the blog around the problem, right? And then once they educated everybody on the problem, everyone's like, yes, I have that problem. You're right, that's hard to do. Yes, I wish I could do that. And they say, whoa, we got the solution for you. Where you do that, sometimes it's, you know, at the beginning, if what you're doing is you're talking about the problem, you have to somehow figure out to get to the prospects where they are, as opposed to your own site, because they're not necessarily looking for you. They don't necessarily know anything about you. They're not evaluating your product, but they are talking about this stuff in places, right? So you're looking for, where are they? Are they in forums? Are they on social networks, news group, industry events? The purpose, right, is to educate them on the problem. But you know, you're not in heavy sales mode here, right? You're not saying, here's my product, buy, right? You're trying to engage them. The desired action here is you're trying to get their permission to regularly provide them information. So I'm trying to get them to sign up to my newsletter. I'm trying to get them to subscribe to my blog. You know, in social media, I want them to follow me, or I want them to like my Facebook page, because then I have permission to sort of get in front of them and do stuff. And how I do that is I provide useful information to them. In this case, it's information about this problem that they're trying to solve. I'm not selling them anything, right? So I can be entertaining here, right? But it's more what I'm trying to do here is I'm just trying to gauge this audience, right? I'm trying to get in the middle of this dialogue about the problem. When I get to the next stage, I'm more in evaluation and buy. So stuff changes a little bit here, right? So the programs and the content I'm building changes, and it's shifting more towards solutions, right? So I'm doing articles and blog posts. I've got a demo video. I've got an interactive video talking about my solution, right? I'm doing in-person events. I've got analyst reports. I'm doing case studies on customers, right? This is a shift from the marketing you were doing at the other stage, right? Where I'm now sort of bringing in things. This is where it makes a lot of sense to start doing advertising and promotion and things like that, because I'm actually going to, put some money out to get some money back. I'm trying to get you into the buy stage here. Where I'm doing that is increasingly on my turf, right? Because I got to get them to where I am in order to sell them stuff, right? So that's shifted as well. So then your website, or a lot of people do this stuff on their Facebook pages now, where they can actually transact business and get people in there. That stuff becomes more important. You're still doing things out where the customer is, but it's shifting more onto your turf. The purpose of that stuff is to educate them about the solution, to differentiate what you've got from the other stuff on the market or their alternatives, and to get them to evaluation, get you on the short list, get them to a purchase. So the desired action there is getting their permission to actually sell them stuff. I put sell in quotes because it's not really, it's not really selling. Nobody wants to be sold to, even when they're actively buying. But it's more you're getting their permission to talk about your solution now, as opposed to just the problem. So again, that's like, now what I'm trying to get is I'm trying to get their contact information enough so that I can have a salesperson contact them, or I'm trying to get them to sign up for my free trial, or I'm trying to just get them to buy. Then when I get to the far right-hand side of that process, right, it looks different, right? So I've got them. They bought. They're my folks, right? So I have lots of permission to talk to them and interact with them. The things I'm trying to do is more around engagement, right? I'm trying to get them to use my stuff. I'm trying to make sure they understand the value of it. I'm trying to make sure that if they have a problem, they're getting that solved really easily so that everybody's happy, right? I'm trying to make sure everybody's happy. So customer support, is increasingly a super important marketing channel. And I know you got these people coming to talk about that next week or whatever. I mean, don't underestimate that, right? And when I started marketing, we never talked to customer support ever. I wouldn't even know who the guy was running customer support in some cases. Now, customer support's so important, you can't afford to not be paying attention to customer support. And thinking about what materials can you provide for them as marketer? What can you do to help them make sure that your customers are happy? You need to be regularly interacting with customer support and working with customer support to make sure this stuff works. And then it's how-to guides, it's best practice guides, it's getting your users together, right, so that they can talk to each other, so that they can help solve problems with each other, right? So it's user forums, user groups. There's things like ROI and pricing things, right? Particularly as you move to the renewal stage, they might say, well, we had budget last year, we don't have budget this year, right? So you have to make sure that there isn't an objection there somewhere about pricing, and they understand how to express the value that they've gotten. And then you have your customer newsletter and things that you're doing like that. And again, this is mainly on your turf where this stuff is happening because, these are your people. But you also have places where they go. I mean, they will self-organize if your customer groups are big enough, right? They'll self-organize on LinkedIn. At IBM, we had all these user groups that we didn't run. Customers ran it. We worked with them and we were happy to help wherever we could. But the whole point of the user group was to have something independent of the company. And then again, the desired action there is, I want them so happy they're telling their friends, right? I want them to refer me to other people. I want them to agree to be a reference. I want to use them as a press reference for a case study on video. And then I want their renewal. These are the desired actions. So it's different, right? So we think about those three things. It's very different types of programs, very different stuff that you're doing. So you make a decision, okay, I've got marketing things happening here. Each situation is really different in terms of what you're doing. And then we get to this point where, yesterday when I did this talk, there's this guy sitting in the back and he said, that just sounds so hard. And I said, you're right, it is hard, because making money is really hard. It's really hard to run a successful business. Like if it wasn't really hard, we would all be in Fiji drinking fruity drinks from a coconut, but we're not, right? Because this is hard, right? If this was easy, we'd all be doing it. It's not easy, it's really hard. So that's my little speech on that. Then the next thing is, okay, so you figure all that stuff out, and you can still mess this up because you don't have a good operational plan. And it used to be we kind of did a lot of this stuff off the cuff. Now we can measure everything, and I find none of this stuff works very well if I don't have a schedule and an operational plan. So if I decide I'm doing email marketing, I have my email marketing process documented. I got a calendar, I got a plan, I got a budget. Same thing with if I'm doing paid traffic stuff like AdWords or whatever. I gotta. Here's my keywords. Here's how much I'm paying for them. Here's my ads. Here's my landing pages. This is what it looks. I have this spreadsheet with like 19 tabs on it. I did a workshop on this last weekend. I was calling it the big old spreadsheet, and I threw this thing up, and everybody was terrified. But if you actually get into this, right, where you've got a bunch of things going, you cannot get it done without it, right? It took me forever to build that spreadsheet. Now I give it to people like it's as a starting point, right? Your spreadsheet will look different than my spreadsheet, but you'll have something that looks like that, right? If you have a content plan, you have a content calendar, so you're tracking all this stuff. And then you get to metrics. So because we're doing a lot of digital things that we can measure now, metrics are kind of cool. Like it used to be when I started marketing, we did a lot of print advertising, and the frustrating thing about print is I never know if it worked, right? No matter what we did, like the very first print ads I ran were like 1994. 1994. We ran print ads in this like developer magazine, and we would do like custom phone numbers, because we weren't really doing landing pages at that point, but we did try and do custom landing pages, but not that many people would go, but most people would phone us. And so we have a custom 1-800 number for that particular ad, so we could track how many people called and stuff. But even with that, it was really, really hard to track. Like you would, and we'd have the salespeople asking, well, how did you hear about us? And it was like, maybe I saw your ad and whatever. Now it's really easy to track, right? If a lot of your stuff is digital, it's easy to track. But it's almost too easy to track in that there's like a million things you could track that are pointless, right? So you get these people, they'll ask me, well, should I, on my homepage, should I be tracking page views, or should I be tracking number of visitors, or should it just be unique visitors? And there's, because Google will give you all this data, right? And so, in my opinion on this, the only thing that really matters is, again, you're trying to get a handle on how people are flowing through this process, right? So if I can say, well, for every 100 unique visitors, I get four free trials, right? Then measure unique visitors. If I don't see a relationship between that, then don't measure that, measure something else, right? It's the same thing with email, right? I do a lot of email marketing, and there's 1,000 things you can measure on email, right? Like open rates and click-through rates, and once they get to the page, how many people convert, right? And each one of those, if we're measuring it, we're doing it for a reason, right? So if I'm worried that my subject lines are lousy and not engaging, I care about open rate, right? I care about delivery rate if I'm worried that I'm getting on people's spam list, right? So I'm going to measure that. If I'm not worried about that, then I don't need to measure that. But so metrics are great, but you don't want to be measuring a bunch of metrics that don't really tell you anything about stuff in your process, right? If it doesn't. So basically, the only thing you need to know is how people are moving through the process. And those metrics will be very specific to you. I wish there was great marketing dashboarding software, and there's not, right? You end up clobbling together a bunch of stuff. Someday I'm going to do a startup that fixes this problem. I keep threatening, but right now the way you do it is you've got Google Analytics can measure a bunch of your tracking stuff, and if you have it set up properly, you can measure conversions and lots of things like that. If you have marketing automation software, or email software, you can measure all your email stuff there. How many people in delivery and opens and click-throughs and all that stuff. And then you've got Salesforce is probably tracking all your sales stuff. So it's ugly to bring this stuff together. And that's, I think, sometimes why people don't do it. But you have to bring it together. If you don't have it, you don't know what you're doing, right? You don't know what's working and what's not working. If you don't know what's working and what's not working, your VP of sales is going to come up and say, why don't we spend $100,000 on a golf tournament? And you're going to have that fight, right? But if you know it, right, then you can say, we're not going to spend $100,000 on a golf tournament. Here's why. The golf tournament only applies to people we're already talking to in sales. And my problem is way down here. Let me show you the numbers, right? So it's that kind of stuff, right? But if I don't have the numbers, then I say, well, I think, right, our problem is over here, not over here. And then he'll say, well, I think we should spend $100,000 on a golf tournament, right? And it's your opinion versus their opinion. And everybody, everybody's an armchair marketer, right? Everybody's been exposed to marketing. Everybody thinks they're a marketing genius. So you actually have to be the marketing genius, which is a whole different thing and requires a ton of work, right? So that's kind of the end. Oh yeah, then the last one is analysis. So this is really important. So if you go back to my cycle of marketing how I started out doing programs. So I picked my random programs, I'd execute them. If they didn't do very well, I'd check them out and I'd pick some new ones. Now, if you're actually doing all this other stuff, I've done this deep dive on customers, deep dive on my solution, deep dive on how people are moving through the process. And then I picked a bunch of tactics, and one of those tactics didn't work, something very bad is wrong, right? This is not just throw it away and forget about it. Something very bad is wrong. It is a clue that you have made an incorrect assumption about something, right? And this deserves scrutiny, right? So you either assume something about your customers that was wrong, assume something about the sales process that was wrong, assume something about your solution that was wrong, right? It is a big red flag that something terrible has happened, right? So I'll give you an example of this. I worked for this company, we got acquired by Seaball, big company, $2 billion revenue, 8,000 employees. I inherited this gigantic marketing team. First time I ever, big marketing team, big marketing budget. And shortly after I started there, we're crawling through the sales numbers and we're trying to get a picture of where everything is. And the sales numbers look like crap, actually. Like they were kind of dropping off like this. Now we were in the middle of the start of a recession, right? So everybody said, well, it's dropping off because, things are looking bad. And I'm like, yeah, but our market is still growing and we have competitors that are growing and we're not growing. That's a little weird. And so maybe we've got a problem here. So, and I'm new. So when you're new, you can be annoying. And so I said, well, I'm going to go sit with the inside salespeople and see if I learn something. It's always a good exercise to do. So looking at the numbers, I have 5 inside salespeople, 4 people where their numbers all look like this. And I have one guy where his numbers look like this. And I'm like, what's this person doing that these other people are doing? And they're like, oh, he's just a really good sales guy. I'm like, all right, let's see what makes him a really good sales guy. So I sit on there and we do this thing where I just keep my mouth shut and we listen to conversations he has. So it was the most shocking thing. So at that point, if you were selling customer relationship management software, the budget holder for that was in IT. The CIO owned the budget for that. So you went in there, you went into IT, you sold them on that stuff, they deployed it, it had to work with all their internal stuff, it was a big integration project, massive professional services, that's how you sold it, right? So all my marketing was focused on that stuff, all my materials focused on this head of IT. This guy, he gets on the phone, he takes my lead, right, where he has the guy in IT, he gets on the phone, he gets the guy in IT and he says, who runs sales? And he says, oh, that's so-and-so, yeah, can you put me through to him? Then he goes to the sales side of the business and he says, I got this awesome stuff, customer relationship management software. It's going to be awesome for your department. Your IT guys might not like it, but it's going to be awesome. It's going to make you look like a star, blah, blah, blah. You should let my sales guy come in there and talk to you. And I'm like, the hell? This guy is selling a totally different part of the business. And then you start crunching through it. Then we say, well, let's go back and look at the numbers for that. Does that actually work better? And it turned out, not every company, right? Not every company, but for some kinds of companies, if you went in through the business side as opposed to IT, you could get the deal done faster. It was a bigger deal. And the whole thing just worked better. And I have no marketing programs to cover this guy. None. I have no marketing programs focused on the head of sales. And so it's like, oh no, this is a major problem. So we had to go back and retool a whole bunch of stuff, right? So, but had I not questioned that, right? Like, had I not said, oh, well, he's just a good salesperson, or, oh, the market's crummy, or, oh, whatever, we would have missed this massive opportunity. And I'm not saying we did a great job capitalizing on it. We didn't, right? It was a hard job to go back and convince everybody that we actually needed to market to this other constituency. We didn't have perfect data on it at the beginning. We had Salesforce eating our lunch in the smaller accounts. But it was a significant piece of insight, right? So if you have something that's not working, you can't just throw it out until you get a satisfactory answer, right? You might not be able to pinpoint exactly what's going on, but take it very seriously and think there might be an assumption here that I made that is wrong, right? Or it's changed, or something's happened. And the only way to really get under that is to somehow, get in front of a bunch of customers, get in front of the people that are with customers and figure it out. So that's that analysis piece. And so the thing all comes together into this thing, which, instead of being kind of meh, is sort of awesome. So it starts on the left-hand side where you've got your inputs, right? I got customer, I got offering, I got buying process. Then I'm doing a really smart job of picking my tactics, right? I'm executing them like perfectly because I have these lovely project plans to do it, right? I got a bunch of metrics that are meaningful for me to make decisions about where I'm going to focus my stuff in the future. And then I'm doing this analysis about, stuff failed, why did it fail? And more importantly, is this little arrow that goes back to the inputs, right? That I say, I'm doing this analysis, I'm going back and saying, were my inputs good, right? Does this back up my inputs, or were my inputs crappy in the first place? I need to change those and then go back run the cycle again. So that's it. So questions, ask me something hard. Anybody have a hard question? And if you don't want to ask me in front of the camera and stuff, you can ask me after. Because I know it's a little hard when you're recording stuff. People are like, yeah, I've got this specific question, but I'm worried it's going to look bad if I ask it. Anything? Questions? No? All right. Okay.
So I'm CEO of a company, and I don't have a marketing background.
Right.
I came more from the technical side.
Yeah.
Something new, a different role. And so marketing was new to me, and so I kind of jumped in it by going around and just asking a lot of, having the coffees with experts, just saying,
Yeah.
give me marketing 101.
Right.
I did a fairly good job, I think, of going through a lot of the steps, just kind of a strategy.
Yeah.
And then within the company, we've kind of totally failed at taking that down to kind of tactical and operational.
Right.
Part of it is we just don't have an expertise. We haven't invested properly in sort of, somebody that's dedicated on that. Within a startup, and I think a lot of what I've seen within MaRS too is there's a lot of technical expertise when you start a company. When does it make sense to go and seek and bring in somebody just dedicated to marketing?
Right.
And what should you be looking for in a marketing person?
This is a great question. So, it's a conversation I have a lot because I think startups, this has got to be the worst person to hire, like worst meaning most difficult person to hire, not terrible people. But because the whole reason you're bringing somebody in to do marketing is because you don't feel like you have the skills in-house. So how on earth can you assess their skills, right? So one, you've got to decide when to bring them in. And so, I think it becomes obvious when you start feeling a lot of pain. So, the workload starts being excessive, right? And it's taking you away from important things that you should be focused on other parts of your business. That's one thing you'll know. Some folks that I've talked to have had good luck with, they've got to the point where there's some tactical stuff, like you say, right? They've done the work up front. They know what they should do. They just don't have the arms and legs to actually execute on stuff. And what they'll do instead of doing a hire right away is they'll dip their toe into outsourcing it a little bit. So they'll say, okay, media relations is going good. We know if we get media coverage, we get lots of traffic, lots of hit, lots of business. So we want to sort of double down on media relations, but that requires you to build a media list. You've got to build stories. You've got to be constantly pitching the media. You've got to be developing relationships with the media. That's great stuff to do in-house if you have the cycles. If you don't, well, you can hire a PR consultant to do it for you. So you may want to do that for a little bit to see is that actually true? Can an outside person help you? The other thing you can do, and I always recommend this, is if you think the problem is just more executional, or maybe you just don't know how to execute, you know the stuff you want to do, but you're not the expert in doing the execution, you can invest in bringing an expert in for short-term basis and basically just suck their brain on the execution stuff. So you basically join with them at the hip and say, all right, how do we build an operational plan, right? Let's do it together. Right? How would you do this? So if you're with the PR person, right? Where's the list? I need the list. Don't keep the list. I want to see the list. We're going to work on the list together, right? And then at the end, what you have is not only did you get a bunch of stuff done, but you've now educated yourself on how to get the stuff done so that you're not reliant on the person outside. The outside help is expensive, right? So, and not only is it expensive, it's, you shut off the money tap and it just goes away, right? As opposed to if you had even a junior person that was learning and getting educated and getting better, not only are they getting good at the tactical execution stuff, they're learning a lot about your business, right? So they're getting deeper market expertise, and so all their execution stuff gets better because of that. The outside people are never going to be as deep into your business because they're working with 10 businesses or 8 businesses, and you might be getting a little slice of their time. Or worse than that, you spend all this time getting them up to speed, you just get them so that they're good, and they leave the PR agency and go somewhere else, or they leave the marketing agency and they're gone, and then you got to take a new person and get them up to speed. It's awful, right? So so that's what I would do. So, if you think, I don't want to take the leap to hire somebody inside, but I just need more expertise on how to execute stuff, then I would consider bringing an expert in to kind of teach me and then go away, right? Like, and make it a short-term contact. It's not, we're going to do this forever. Then if you decide, okay, this is actually a lot of work, I know how to do it, but, it's a lot of work. Then once you know how to do it and you know the specific requirement you've got, hiring gets a lot easier, right? So you're not just interviewing random marketing people now. You're saying, okay, this is my, I need somebody to focus on media relations. These are the pubs I'm trying to hit. How many of these people do you know, right? Or I know I'm doing media relations. You've done media relations. Show me your good hits, right? And walk me through your process, right? How did you develop the story? How did you pitch it? When were you successful? When did it work? When didn't it work? That sort of thing. Otherwise, what you're saying is hey, you've got this job description, general marketing, and you'll get people that are good at PR, people that are good at email, people that just want to be in marketing and don't know anything yet, right? Which might be fine too if you can teach them. But the key is getting really specific on the requirements so that you can do a good job of assessing. The other thing I would recommend is that marketers, is part of what we're good at, is we're really, really good bullshitters, for lack of a better word. So it's, that's what we're good at, right? We're good at telling stories. We're good at making stuff that isn't so great sound great. So there's nothing better than having a marketing person involved in the hiring process because, we all know we're doing it and we know how we do it. So marketing people are really good at assessing the talent of other marketing people. So if you have marketing people that you know in your network or on your advisory board or whatever, then I would try and bring that person in to be part of the process to help interview and assess skills because they'll see things that you don't see. Because nobody can assess a marketing person like another marketing person. I just did this with a startup where they hired a bunch of people. And it was a really good experience because there was a candidate there that I thought was extremely strong. That the other folks on the executive team they thought she was good, but they didn't think she was awesome. And I was like, no, you don't understand. She's awesome, right? And they sort of gave her another try and dug deeper in it. And she's in the job now, doing a great job. But I think having somebody that knows what to look for involved in the process can save you from making a big mistake. And a mishire in marketing can be extremely painful. A lot of the places where I've been the VP of marketing, I've been like the second or third VP of marketing. So sort of coming in and mopping up the mess of a bad hire. And it's usually not that the person was, bad. It's just it was a misfit of the talent that the person had and what they actually needed done at the company. And those go really badly when you have that, and then you got to go through the whole process of separating, and then you got to find the next one, and it's painful. But that's a good question. Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
So the steps you went through, I think, were really helpful for, what I'm assuming is for a software company that probably has a good product, a great product that's ready to go and you're trying to sell and make money.
Yeah.
What would your advice be to startups who, I think there are a lot of software startups these days that are trying to focus on that MVP, that beta test,
Right.
where the goal might be a little different, where maybe making money is not as important as getting good feedback and all that. Would those steps be tweaked slightly?
Well,
How would you do that?
sort of, right? So the thing is, again, you're way over on the left side of that process, right? So what you're trying to do when you're trying to develop an MVP, you're looking for that product market fit, right? So that fit between I've got an offering and people love it, right? But it's the people love it part where a lot of folks get stuck. It's not even so much the minimum viable product, it's people love it. What people? What kind of people love it, right? Like I have a bunch of early stage startups right now where I'm sitting on the advisory board where they're going through this process and they've got an offering and they think it's awesome, right? And they're in alpha or whatever. They're really still figuring out minimum viable product, but they've got something, right? And it's out there and people are playing with it and they're trying to figure out, some people love it and some people don't. Where are the patterns, right? Who are the people that love this thing? And do we understand why people love it, right? Can we isolate that? So it isn't just, people, So for example, one of the companies I'm working with has a tool for data visualization. And so there are, marketers think that's great because they use it in infographics and things like that. It looks good on the web. And so you've got different constituencies there, right? You have people that build a lot of those graphics for other people, essentially people in digital agencies. And then you have independent people like bloggers, right? That I want to build an infographic for my blog. And when you start looking at it, they're trying to dig under, well, who's a better target market for me? These people that just do 1 or 2 a month and they don't have any skills and they just want to mock it up and just get it out there, or the folks that are highly skilled, but this gives them a way to do it really fast. These are very different value propositions, right? So what they're working through now is on the phone with these people, sort of walking through, you're using it a lot, you love it, why do you love it, right? If you could add one thing, what would it be? If you could take one thing away, what would it be? And then walking through all this sort of who are you, what's your background, what do you do, right? And what's emerging is a picture of, if you're highly skilled and you look like this, then these are things that you really love. If you're not, then you're like this, and these are things that you really love. And then they have to make an assessment of which looks like a better market, which one, where is there more love, where is there less friction to actually sell stuff. Like these folks love it, but I'm not sure they'll ever pay, right? These folks super love it, and they can pass the cost onto their customers. So, that might look like a more attractive market. But it's, it's hard to do. There's another company, I was in Montreal yesterday with an incubator, and there was another company I talked to that, they just kind of had to make an assumption, right? Because they put it out there in alpha, and, it looked like students were going to be a good market for it. So they basically just did a trial of doing a program aimed at students, and it didn't work. And so they said, that didn't look so good. And then they said, okay, busy office workers, let's try that. So they did a thing on busy office workers, and that worked way better, right? So sometimes you just gotta get out there. And then, there's no substitute for talking to people, because you'll know, you'll talk to a whole bunch of people that'll be like, yeah, your thing's okay, it's okay, right? But what you're looking for is the person that's like, oh my God, I would die if I didn't have it. It's like at Jana, we were selling customer relationship management software to everybody, right? And we had great salespeople, we had good product, we had really good professional services people. We could get business, right? So, we were doing a couple $1 million worth of business. But then we had this kind of moment where we found out that we had this particular thing that if you showed it to an investment banker got extremely excited, right? And it wasn't like that when I showed it to people in insurance or people in retail or people in telco, but you put it in front of an investment banker and you say, hey, we can do this thing. They go, oh, I need to get that. That's what you're looking for in your customer discovery interviews and things. You're looking for, oh, that's really exciting, right? And at the beginning, it's hard to tell, right? Like in that case, right? We knew we had the ability to do many, many relationships. We knew it was important for some people. We just didn't know it was really, really important to investment bankers until an investment banker told us that. But, so you see the person, they're getting all excited, and you're like, why are you excited about that? Well, a big thing that I have to do all day involves me figuring that out, and you've solved a big problem for me. And we're like, this is a neat piece of insight, right? Then we go take that thing to every investment bank on Wall Street and sell it, right? And that worked very well. So that's what you're looking for, is this kind of, pattern recognition on the people that get really excited. What is it about them, right, that makes them a segment, right? What do those people have in common? Maybe it's two segments, right? What do they have in common? How do you do that? But it's really on that customer piece. You've got customer offering, whatever. It's really that customer and offering. It's not so much buying process, because you're not there yet, right? You worry a lot about buying process once you're selling stuff, but where you're at, it's really more about customer and what do they love about your thing? What are the competitive alternatives? Why do they care? What gets them excited? That kind of stuff. That's a good question. Anybody else? No? Good? Okay. Oh,
Sorry, one more follow-up. Back to sort of the hiring on the marketing side.
Yeah.
How important is it for that person to have previous sector experience, or are you looking for more of a?
It depends. It depends, right? It depends on what your sales model looks like. And, if you're expecting that person to create a lot of content, and that content needs to be well informed about your market, then it might make sense to hire somebody that's got a lot of sector experience. If what you're doing is, they're not going to create content, you've got somebody else inside that can help them create content, then maybe you can go with somebody that's just got more tactical execution experience, and you're going to focus on getting them up to speed in the sector. Like when I joined, most of the companies I've joined, I have not had a lot of sector experience, and I've just had to do it. And I'm lucky, one of the great things about having an engineering degree is everybody just assumes you can learn everything. So you can go in there and say, don't worry, I'll figure it out. And they say, good, okay, good. Especially if the person hiring you is also an engineer, that works really well. But, like Jana, we were really focused on financial services. I knew nothing about financial services when I started, right? But read a bunch of books, went a bunch of sales calls, sit around having lunch with investment bankers. After a while, you get it, right? But at the beginning, there definitely is a ramp up. But, that's easier to teach than marketing skill, particularly if you don't have anybody else in the company that's going to teach them. Right, so I would be inclined, if it's your first marketing hire, I would be inclined to go for marketing skill over domain expertise, because you're hiring that person because you don't have the marketing skill. So you're counting on them to get up to speed on something that you can't teach them. So you're going to say, okay, go self-study yourself into being a great marketer, and they may or may not take the initiative to do that. Be riskier, but it depends. Like when I started my first marketing job, I was selling database software to database administrators, and if you didn't know anything about database, you'd just be useless, right? That's why I got the job, because I knew what a SQL query was, really. And then, but it was a big marketing team, and they were smart marketing people, and they were teaching me about marketing, and I was teaching myself. But it was kind of a non-starter if you didn't know anything about that stuff, and it was quite technical, so you needed a bit of technical acumen to sort of do that. So, the key thing is passion, right? Like if people are really excited about what you're selling, like marketers always do better marketing stuff they're really excited about. Like I get really excited about Gorpy stuff because I'm kind of a geek, right? So, the other day, somebody sent me an email about this company, and they're doing this thing that helps you do virtualization in data center. And I was like, I would love to market that. And every other marketer I know is like, are you kidding me? I want to market iPhones, right? But you need somebody that's going to get excited about the thing. And so if domain expertise means they're more excited about it, then go with that. But the litmus test is, what you don't want is the marketer that goes, God, this stuff is so uncool. I wish I didn't have to market it because it's so uncool. Like that's the person you do not want, right? As soon as you get a whiff of that, you got to get rid of those people, because it will show in the marketing. They'll just do lousy, lazy marketing. Like you got to be excited about this stuff. Like if you're not excited about the thing you're trying to pitch, your marketing will never be great. I'm quite convinced of that. So all the marketing hiring I do, you're sort of looking for, skill and acumen and whatever. But if they have that thing where it's like, oh my God, I love this thing you're doing, then they're going to get up to speed on all the rest of the stuff if you can help them with that, right? But you can't infuse them with excitement if they're not excited about it at the beginning. They sure as heck aren't going to be 2 months into it when stuff is hard. Anyways, yeah.
This has been great. I'm just wondering how much would be transferable between a customer and an investor?
Oh, a customer and an investor. Investors are really different, right? Like, in some ways, in other ways it's not. Like, so if you're pitching, like if I was building a pitch for a customer versus a pitch to an investor, it's different things because the investors are worried about different things, right? Investors are worried about, your ability to execute as a company, right? And, do you have domain expertise? Do you have a firm grasp on the problem you're trying to solve and the market? Well, you need a lot of market information, right? So you need to be able to convince people that you have a firm grasp on this thing, right? Like, so we understand the problem is there. This is why we know the problem is there. We understand we have a good solution that people will buy, and this is why we know that. And then, sometimes that's, sometimes you do that with data. Sometimes you do that with I've got these customers and they're willing to say that. Sometimes it's like, well, it's me and Joe and we ran a company last year that did that and we exited for 50 million, so we can do it, right? This is why repeat entrepreneurs, they have it so easy, right? Because that whole execution, it's like me being an engineer and trying to say, oh, I can learn this because I'm an engineer. It's like that, right? If you've done a good, successful company, it's not all that successful. You've done one, right? Then you sort of get over this hurdle. Can you do it? Yes, you can. Check. And so it's like, okay, is this one a good one to do? Then you move on to that. But those pitches are very different, right? I've done lots of investor pitching, and it's a different kind of an animal, right? You're trying to show there's a big unmet need. You've got a solution for that. That's a really good fit. And then you got to have some proof to sort of back that up and say, this is why we know that. And then you got to say, and we know how to execute on this thing, so give us some money and we'll go do it. So yeah, it's different. Anything else? Thanks so much for hanging out.
I just wanted to make one announcement because I think that ties into your presentation a bit. People in the room that aren't aware, we have workshops that are called Entrepreneur's Toolkit workshops, and we have a series that's called the MarCom Toolkit, which is 3 4-hour workshops that go through making a marketing strategy. It's actually more the doing of building it. So, and there's entrepreneurs there that are facilitators. If you're interested, Lily in the corner can tell you the dates and the details, but I think that might be helpful for this audience.
Sure. And if you have any questions, you can ask me afterwards. And the workshops in MaRS is October 17th. Start with that one. We have 3 sessions, and people focus on workshop and marketing communication stuff for their lectures.
Yeah, and they're small group sessions, like 15 entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
But that was so practical and useful. Thanks very much.
Thanks. Well, thanks for coming. Thank you.